who are joining us for this presentation. I will just, before we get started, invite you to share questions and comments in the chat. As the presentations unfold, we'll hear first from Kimberly, Ransom, and then from Pelle, Tracey. And at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. And so please save your questions or feel free to post them into the chat. I'd like to start by introducing Kimberly Ransom. Dr. Kimberly Ransom is an interdisciplinary historian who studies the history of African American education and the history of childhood. Her research examines the oral history material objects of Black children who once attended segregated schools in the Deep South during the Jim Crow era. As a public scholar and artist, Kimberly also uses her historical research to create public exhibits related to African American childhood in and around schools. In her most recent project, she worked in partnership with her dissertation respondents to create a local museum in the sole remaining Rosenwald Schoolhouse in Pickens County, Alabama. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for being here to support Pelle and I. I am going to just do my technical duty and share my screen. Here we go. And sound. And okay. So good afternoon. I'm delighted to talk with everyone today about my time interning with the Rebuild Foundation at the Stony Island Arts Bank on the south side of Chicago. My presentation will include an introduction, background of who I am, which informs my scholarship and my decision to pursue a graduate certificate in museum studies. I will also then discuss my internship site as I will describe the Rebuild program or the Rebuild Foundation and the Stony Island Arts Bank. And then I will discuss my project. I will describe the goals of my internship, illustrate what I have done, and discuss what I learned. And finally, I will discuss future aims for my work. And this is the Stony Island Arts Bank pictured on the screen. And so first, just a little background about me. I'm an interdisciplinary critical historian. Being a critical historian means that my scholarship always considers how the past has been silenced, underdocumented, or erased. I use critical frameworks and interdisciplinary methods to find and examine these less known histories. My research aims to name, examine, and tell histories that have not been foregrounded in historical scholarship. Additionally, my scholarship puts historical research to action by working with communities to make hidden stories public-facing. My curiosities sit at the intersection of the history of African American education and the history of Black childhood. More specifically, I examine Black children's childhood experiences in and around schools in the past. My agenda across my research and historical action is to make Black childhood visible in the history of African American education and the American imaginary more broadly. My internship with the Rebuild Foundation, which I will later describe in detail, has helped me deepen my understanding of how this interdisciplinary work through museum spaces can be employed. So a little bit about my research. Currently, I'm examining the experiences of once children who attended any of 6 Rosenwald schools, once located in Pickens County, Alabama. And this is a map of Pickens on the left, and then you see the locations of the 6 schools on the right. The Rosenwald School Program was a school building program inspired by the self-determination of African Americans who, following emancipation from slavery, began educating themselves by any means necessary. In his seminal scholarship, The Education of Blacks in the South, 1860 to 1835, Dr. James Anderson emphasizes how African American communities built over 100,000 schoolhouses throughout the South in the early 20th century. These schoolhouses were often one-room schoolhouses, or they could be under a tree in a living room, but like I said, by any means necessary. So with the desire to help African Americans build upon their efforts, Booker T. Washington, founder, educator, and leader of the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, now Tuskegee University, aligned with Julius Rosenwald, philanthropist and CEO of Sears and Roebuck, to aid Black communities in building formal school buildings. Rosenwald would fund a match program, which started in 1912 with 6 schools in Macon County, Alabama, and by 1938 grew to span over 5,300 schools throughout the South. And by 1938, also 1 in 3 Black children attended a Rosenwald school. Overall, African American communities raised over $4.7 million and additionally donated land and labor for the formation of Rosenwald schools. Rosenwald nearly matched every dollar, having given $4 million. So the Rosenwald program touched down in Pickens County, Alabama, with the creation of the Pickens County Training School in 1916. Thereafter, 5 additional schools were built in the county between 1916 and 1925. However, following the Brown versus Board of Education decision, the schools began to close, and by 1973, Rosenwald schools in Pickens County were no more. This photograph represents my family, my grandmother on the left, a graduate of Pickens County Training High School in 1943, and my mother on the right, somewhere around 1957, as a schoolgirl standing in Mamie'sville Elementary School, a Rosenwald school in Pickens County, Alabama. And please note, these photographs were collected during my field work. They were not photographs that were owned by my family. Through a series of serendipitous events in graduate school, I learned that my family, whose origins began in Pickens County, were all connected to the Rosenwald School history as students. As I said, my grandmother, my mother, other family members, and I later would learn my grandmother was an educator in the schools. Previously, I knew nothing about the background of my family prior to their migration north to Chicago in 1959, particularly the education and childhoods of my mother, her siblings, and my grandparents were hidden data in my familial past. No photographs, no diaries, no artifacts, scant shared memories. The collision of the Rosenwald history with my own familial past piqued my scholarly curiosity and motivated me to seek out Black children's childhood experiences within the history of African American education and the Rosenwald School program more specifically. Like my familial past, I found that there was a gap in what is known about the history of Black children's childhood experiences in these schooling spaces. And so I went back to Pickens County, my ancestral land, to examine the childhood experiences of African American school children in and around Rosenwald schools in Pickens. I used historical methods which allow for the examination of history through the employ of creative data collection methods that allow for finding histories which may have otherwise been hidden. These data collection methods include conducting oral histories, material objects, and sourcing data from non-traditional archives. And here are just a few pieces of data from my research. So for my study, I conducted 49 oral histories and amassed over 1,000 material objects and documents from traditional and non-traditional community archives. These data allowed for the examination of the voices and perspectives of Black children who once attended any of the 6 Rosenwald schools in Pickens. So coupled with my personal history and my scholarly curiosities, prior to graduate school, I was a youth development advocate. I ran community-based youth organizations and educational programs across Chicago, particularly in, as I said, community-based organizations and colleges. Additionally, as a poet, I began performing and creating youth and adult open mic spaces in Chicago, and I also went on to publish a book of poetry. While I won't delve deeply into this part of my past, I highlight this work because it was in youth development work that I began to think about A, Black children's liberty to take up childhood status in and around schools, and B, the power and significance of community-based work, and C, art as a form of action. It was through my research and reflections upon community-based work and youth development, education, and the arts that I began to merge these 3 areas of work in my scholarly practice. And pictured here is the sole remaining Rosenwald School in Pickens County, Alabama, that I would go on to help create a museum in this space. So through scholarship, I realized I could create knowledge that would make substantive contributions to the history of education. And 2, through community-based historical action, I could work with my narrators and the broader community to unsilence marginalized histories by curating spaces that shift the public's understanding of local African-American past, becoming spaces for exhibition, archiving, dialogue, education, and cultural uplift. And as I mentioned, specifically in Alabama, while doing my research, I found myself putting my research into action through the development of a local museum in the Pickensville Schoolhouse, which is pictured here. These ideas and experiences led me to pursue the certificate in museum studies at the University of Michigan. And I'd like to mention on the left are my co-conspirators in community-based historical work, Ms. Paulette, her sister, Ms. Carlene, and Ms. Carlene's granddaughter. And this picture is a part of our work in the schoolhouse in 2015 or so, when we were actually building out the space and we were storing the historic school chairs from the schoolhouse in this mobile unit that we rented as a result of a grant that we got through the University of Michigan's Public Scholarship Program. And so I knew I wanted to continue to make historical research public facing through exhibition and curation following my work in Alabama. I felt that the graduate certificate in museum studies would provide me with the knowledge, frameworks, and practical experiences needed to continue working in this area. Requirements for the completion of the certificate included completing a culminating internship in a specific museum setting or museum-related organization. I chose to complete my internship at the Rebuild Foundation's Stony Island Arts Bank, which is located on the south side of Chicago. The Rebuild Foundation describes itself as an artist-led, community-based platform for art and cultural development and neighborhood transformation. Rebuild supports artists and strengthens communities by providing free arts programming and creating new cultural amenities on the south side of Chicago. Their mission is to demonstrate the impact of innovative, ambitious, and entrepreneurial cultural initiatives, and is enriched by 3 core values: Black people matter, Black spaces matter, and Black objects matter. This foundation was founded is founded and led by artist and social innovator Theaster Gates. Rebuild is just a slice of a part of a network of sister organizations led by Theaster that collaborate to extend the social engagement of Gates' studio practice on the South Side. And so I would like to pause to show a bit about Theaster, which is important. As an artist and an innovator, Theaster's work is very expansive. And I wanted to show this clip because I think it gets to the essence of his approach to his work, to building community-based museum spaces. His approach uses lived spaces, materials, sound, and culture to shape spaces for grappling, artistic reflection, expression, and dialogue. So let's listen. And please let me know when we listen if you can't hear. Oh, yes, you should be up, okay.
You'll never hear a word from me if you do what I say.
For the last 6 or 7 years now, the Black Monks have been making pretty cool music. Largely music in museums and kind of performance venues. What's exciting about that music is that the music is always kind of a response to the objects and the people around us. I think with the Chicago series, we were trying to create an environment where we would continue to chant, we would continue to pray, we would continue to talk about race, but we would have this more ambitious monastic sound. No matter where I am, it feels like it keeps coming back to the things that I learned in Chicago. One is the strong kind of funk soul truth of our city. I'm thinking about the amazing sermons that I've heard at Christ Tabernacle or Apostolic Church of God in Christ, and the ways in which the sermon has influenced the way that I think about speaking, or maybe the way that I think about telling a story. And then there's like the streets and kind of the way that one becomes proficient at kind of understanding the nuances of a place and wanting to just communicate really well. And so, you know, between soul and preaching and street life, I feel like the monks have found this like meditative space to kind of reflect on that. In many ways, it was part reflection and education and part new music. And so when we start our process for the series, we kind of started with the image. So the way that we would try to find balance is by looking at the image for inspiration and then creating some kind of triangulation between the image, the audience, and our intention. But we also wanted to kind of demonstrate that the articulation of history didn't have to just come through facts and a lecture, that thing could be animated and in new ways. If we could kind of focus on making really intentional sounds and really open sounds, that might allow other people to be intentional and open and creative in their own ways, you know? And so we're not trying to unlock a particular door, we're just trying to be free, you know? And so it feels like an act of like people get to watch us get freer and freer, and that is hopefully doing something that then allows them in their own ways to get free.
And so I just wanted to highlight this video and let you all hear Theaster's voice directly. One of the things that there's a lot that resonates with me here in my own work, but one of the things that really resonates with me is this notion of watching us get freer and freer, and that in this living museum space that I've experienced, the art is everywhere. It's in theater, it's in the museum, it's in the community, it's in the people, it's in the objects, it's in the atmosphere. And this type of museum work deeply resonates with me as I think about the intersections of the living path with scholarship, art, and community. And so a little bit about Rebuild's work. I'm going to take you to their Instagram page so you can see a little bit more of what they do. They work to culturally develop and transform community through community-based artistic action, and it's evident across several projects. During my internship, I found Rebuild to be an artistic space of grand momentum. It is constantly evolving, stretching, and illustrating scope in terms of what it means to be a local living museum and cultural institution based in an African American community. So I want to show you a few programs here, and I'm thinking this is going to work. So first, we're just going to click into Instagram, and then we're going to do a new share. I have to talk you all through this and myself. Okay, so you should be able to see this. So first, can you see it? Yes. Okay. So, but we switched screens. Didn't want to do that. Okay. So first, I would like to bring to your attention programs at the Rebuild support artists talking, thinking, creating across diverse mediums, from dance to architecture to culinary arts. And so I'd like to call to your attention a newer program called the Experimental Design Lab that illustrates this work across diverse mediums. So here we go.
We create opportunities for inclusivity and what I call friendship between talented people of color and the fashion houses and design world. Through these conversations, we created the Experimental Design Lab.
I'm using fashion as a tool for social change. It's about the preservation of culture and our stories through clothes.
When you want to do really innovative things and things that are outside of the box of the normal Eurocentric way of design, a lot of people don't want to give you money because it's not what they're used to. This award allows me to not have to worry about that. It allows me to circumvent the rules and just do the things that I'm passionate about.
I would say that my work is very much concerned with elevating and dignifying communities. This award is important because it's about representation.
I'm a contemporary choreographer that makes work that, and a lot of times, references the past, but also focuses on love and culture. This award is really important to me because it gives me an opportunity to create dangerously. I can take new risks.
I play in geometry and I'm inspired by architecture. It's creating platforms to allow people to be the best at what they want to be.
Experimental Design Lab is happening. It's live, it is now, and I'm so excited.
We make luxury women's footwear out of Florence, Italy. We present.
So in the interest of time, I won't play the entire clip, but if we were to go forward, you would have even seen culinary arts as a part of the mix. But you get the you get the understanding that this is a collective, a space to bring diverse artists together to think and create and exhibit. In addition, as a part of the archive, which is where my work was focused, and I'm going to get to that in a second, the archive part of the archive holds the Frankie Knuckles wax collection, and putting the archive to work, that collection is used on Sundays in the museum for what's called Soul Sunday. So I'll give you a little snippet of that. And here the DJ is playing records. Dwayne Powell, DJ, is playing records from the Frankie Knuckles collection. And you have community members who come out to this free, event every other Sunday. Also, while the Rebuild Foundation has created and continues to cultivate various community-based cultural institutions and spaces, I want to draw your attention to the space for my internship, which is the Stony Island Arts Bank. And so again, I just want to show you a clip that'll give you a visual and a little information about the Arts Bank.
The Stony Island Arts Bank, it's a repository and a vessel through which we demonstrate that Black people matter, Black art matters, Black objects matter, and Black spaces matter. I'm Sabina Bokhari. I am the Director of Communications and Philanthropic Initiatives at Rebuild Foundation.
I'm Mara Silver, and I'm the Programs and Community Engagement Manager at Rebuild Foundation.
Rebuild Foundation is an artist-led, community-based platform for art, cultural development, and neighborhood transformation in the Greater Grand Crossing neighborhood on Chicago's South Side.
The Stony Island Arts Bank was built in 1923 by William Gibbons Uffendale. It took on the classical revival style that is still prominent in a lot of the features of the Arts Bank. You can see it in the ceiling, in the terracotta. You can see it in many of the arches and even on the exterior of the bank. Today, this building is the only building that was built at that time that remains. It was going to be demolished in 2011 until Theaster Gates, our executive director, stepped inside and asked the city of Chicago if he can purchase it. They allowed him to purchase it for $1 with the stipulation of bringing it up to code in 2 weeks. The Stony Island Arts Bank currently has 4 collections on site. Our JPC, which stands for Johnson Publishing Company Library and Archives, comprises of the books that we see inside the entire collection, which are more than 15,000. The Glass Lantern Slides collection is a collection of more than 60,000 slides that were donated by the University of Chicago. The Frankie Knuckles collection is a collection of more than 4,000 records that we are currently in the process of digitizing alongside the Frankie Knuckles Foundation. And the A.J. Williams collection is a collection of more than 4,000 pieces that we label as Negrobilia, these objects that speak so vividly of Black history in America. All of these collections can live a different life of activation once people.
Okay. So as you can see, the museum and the community space serves a dual purpose. It's a space for neighborhood residents to preserve, access, reimagine, and share their heritage. It's also a destination for artists, scholars, curators, and collectors to research and engage with African American history. I was drawn to Rebuild, and more specifically, the Stony Island Arts Bank, because this living museum aligns with my own interests and work. Okay, go back and share. Sorry. Okay, there we go. And so to start my internship, I first had a series of meetings with Deirdre, the MSP Associate Director, with Ellen Alderman, the Director of Programs and Operations at the Rebuild Foundation, and Dr. Sampata Aranke, Director of Archives and Innovation Programs. And through this series of conversations, we decided that I would concentrate my work in the Stony Island archives. And specifically, while there are 4 collections, my work centers on the Edward J. Walker collection, which is the last collection listed at the bottom of the screen. This collection has approximately 4,000 objects of Negrobilia dating back centuries. The images and objects depict stereotypical caricatures and renderings of Black people. And in addition, there are also renderings of Black life and experiences and arts. So Williams' archive represents over 30 years of collecting. And this was really powerful to me because I remember in the museum studies program, we visited the Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. And I did not know that Ford was, at the time, I didn't know what a collector Ford was, but I was struck by just the power to collect. And so it was really cool for me to see the collecting of African Americans and other minorities at work. And so I want to share with you a little bit of Mr. Walker and his description of why he started collecting. I need to change my screen. 1 second. And here we go. Okay, go back.
I got started collecting quite by accident. I was in an antique store in central Indiana, and I saw an item off to the left as I was leaving the store. It caught my eye. I stared at it. I got chills down my back, my spine, and I rushed out of the store because it was something that I had never seen before. But I thought about it, and I went back and I bought it. It was a character of a Black man, but it was something that I didn't want anyone else to see. So I wanted to take it out of circulation, so I bought it to take home and hide away. And that was essentially what got me started, because as I continued to go out to antique stores, I started seeing more and more of these kinds of items. And I was still buying them essentially to take them out of circulation. One reason I continued to collect was just to see how much stuff I could find. And I was just amazed at the range of the type of items that were out there that most people would tend to ignore. Ultimately, it became important to collect these things to save them, because they could be destroyed, because this is an important part of our history. And it's a part of the history that some would try to ignore or try to have you forget. But it's a sad part of our history, but nonetheless is important. And the collection documents this part of our history in a very factual way, in a way that you can't deny that it didn't happen, it didn't exist. And so it's important for that. There are kids, Black kids today, who don't realize that's a part of their history. And if you ask them about it, they can't tell you anything about it. But I've been told that since the collection has been here, there have been students who've come through who are just kind of blown away when they see it, and they leave here with a total different perspective and with a desire to do more, to learn more as a result of seeing parts of the collection.
Okay, so I thought it was important for you to see Mr. Walker and hear his description of why he started collecting. And now and also his understanding of the archive. And now I am going to stop sharing this screen. Sorry, my apologies. I just don't see my other screen. Okay, I will just get out of this and hopefully it will. Sorry, we'll go right back in. There we go. All right. Okay, and so my
Kimberly?
work.
Oops,
Yes.
sorry. I don't want to rush you, but just in the interest of time, we'll want to move on to Pelle's probably in the next few minutes.
Okay, no problem.
The
I'm
time
timing it. It said it has 7 minutes.
The time is
Is that right?
speeding by too quickly.
Okay. So I'll
Thank
move
you.
quickly. Okay. So I worked in the Mellon Archival Innovation Program. In short, the Rebuild Foundation launched an archival innovation program that allowed artists or supported artists in accessing the archive to create new work. And so my job was to get in the archives, review the archival holdings, make these documents accessible for artists, meet with artists to learn more about their work, and then meet with the artists to discuss the collection and talk through particular segments of the collection that I felt would be of interest. Also, I participated in programming at the Stony Island Arts Bank as a way to learn more about the museum space and the way that the archives are being used outside of traditional research. Ben Lamar Gay is an amazing artist, and he's traveled all over the world and also has deep roots in the Chicago community, and his work reflects his diverse experiences. So I did research on him before I started looking in the archive, just to be sure that, oh, let me back up. I was assigned to work with Ben as one of the fellows. So I did research on him to kind of understand his music and his artistry so that I could kind of try to have that eye as I was working in the archive. And so I toured the archive to get a sense of the Ed Walker collection. I met with staff to learn more about the collection and the Mellon archive. And I also did some research on my own and learned that Ben's work moves through sound, color, and space in his depictions of summer, or in his depictions of life in general. But this example that I was going to show you, but I'm not going to play, shows specifically his depictions of summer and how he juxtaposes that with sound and visual. And so after meeting with Ben, I got to work in the archive. First, I practiced working with various documents just to see how I might describe them, what kind of documents I would choose. Ultimately, I pulled, after meeting with Ben and discussing with him, I pulled items that had to do with music, string instruments, images, scores, playbills. In particular, he was also interested in color and lines and writing. And so I tried to pull documents that I thought would be of interest to him. And so here's some sampling of some of the documents that I pulled, and I stored these documents after playing around with different technology. I decided the best place was to store them was in PowerPoint so that I could both display the image for Ben as well as have the accompanying text that he could read that I used to describe my interactions with the objects. And here is a sample of some of the notes that I took that are attached to the objects. And these notes looked at everything from the visuals to what's written, to the types of paper, to the years of the documents, any writings, who the people are, the time that these things were happening, etc. And these are just some more visuals of different works that I pulled. And then Ben, after meeting and discussing, he also is looking through the Johnson Publishing collection in the books to see if there are any signatures or writings that he can also be inspired by. So through this process, and Ben is presenting on his work in the archives on April 23rd of this month. So through all of this work, I became inspired as an artist, as a scholar, and used some of my time to explore the archive and perhaps produce my own new work. And so I say, or call it Postcard Project Loading. And so in the archive, I was struck by these images of African-American children on postcards, these distorted and, by my estimation, malicious postcards. And so I have begun to work with these postcards to develop a new research project. Some of the things that I'm noticing about the postcards is the notes on the postcards, which usually are very normalized and disjointed from the actual postcard, like "Merry Christmas, Susie, see you next year," which stands to, in an eerie way, even normalize more these very odd images. And so I'll move quickly through the images, but some of the things that I've also noticed that I've begun researching is also the captions on the postcards, which also serve to normalize or make these malicious images humorous, to call them into the public imagination as humor. Also images that align Black children outside of the status and category of childhood, and rather align them with labor, with fighting, with kind of being like a sideshow, making normal human behavior like eating fruit become an oddity, and things like normal, natural things like a person's hair becoming juxtaposed with something that's more animal, as this card says, Aunt Venus hunting. And so my project that I'm envisioning, these are some more pictures from the archive that are positive and that reflect real lived experiences of African Americans. And these are some pictures from my own collection and my own research taken by William Gore on the left when he was just a 14-year-old boy. And so I'm going to use what I've learned in the Stony Island Arts Bank to develop this new project where I am creating counter images and counter narratives to these derogatory postcards. And so I'm working on developing research questions. I've been pulling research around community archives and also historical postcards. And my future aim is to conduct research and writing on these postcards that also talk and develop a community workshop programs that create counter narratives where local community members can share their historical family photos and create new postcards. I would like to do a public installation on a piece of land that I own on the South Side, and also continue volunteering at the Rebuild Foundation. And finally, I'll be giving a public talk on this work with Rebuild at Rebuild on May 7th, conducting a community workshop this summer, and hopefully launching my first installation this summer, thinking of June. So thank you for witnessing my talk. And many thanks to Rebuild, to the Museum Studies program, and everyone who has helped me along the way.
Thank you, Kimberly. Gosh, I certainly wish that we had several more hours to hear about this work and also the upcoming projects. But we'll move quickly now to our second speaker. I know some people may need to log out precisely at 1 for commitments, but you're of course welcome to stay so that Pelle can share some of his work with us. And moving from Chicago to Philadelphia, Pelle Tracey is a third-year PhD candidate here at the University of Michigan School of Information. His research interests include algorithmic decision-making, infrastructures, and the politics of record keeping. His dissertation project examines how algorithmic assessment is impacting homelessness services systems. the social workers who labor within them, and the unhoused people they serve. Pelle is a member of the Culturally Responsive Computing Lab, the Archives and Digital Curation Group, and is an affiliate researcher at the Center for Ethics, Society, and Computing. Welcome, Pelle, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Kimberly. That was a fantastic and really fascinating presentation. I'll definitely try and check out your talk in May. Let me quickly share here. All right. So the talk I'm going to give today is a recap of the internship I did as part of the MSP graduate certificate program, which I completed last summer at the Philadelphia Institute of Contemporary Art. And so a little background on the ICA. So founded in 1963, the ICA is a non-collecting museum or a Kunsthalle, and is one of the only ones in the US and was one of the first. I think it's important to highlight a couple other things about the ICA. So one is that entry is and has always been free, which is enabled in part because it's a university affiliated museum. So it's affiliated with the University of Pennsylvania. And the core mission really, I think to drill it down to one thing, is they have worked for a long time to try to bring under-recognized artists to the attention of the broader world. And they've been pretty successful at that. So ICA presented early or even the first solo shows of artists such as Laurie Anderson, Glenn Ligon, Cy Twombly, Andy Warhol, Agnes Martin, and Robert Mapplethorpe, among many others. And they, I think for a long time, and certainly now, have tried to position themselves as really being on the bleeding edge of contemporary art, both in terms of the media that the artists they work in, but also the content of their work. So I spend between 25 and 30 hours a week at ICA between May and August last year, funded primarily by the MSP program, but also supported by the Rackham Graduate School here at Michigan. And I worked on lots of different projects, some smaller ones, which were largely focused on research and writing, and then two larger ones that kind of spanned the whole summer, and those are what I'll talk about here. So those two, first is a project called I is for Institute, and the second is an exhibition by the artist Carl Chang. One of the major projects I worked on, this I is for Institute project, and so to give context on this, I would say that the ICA is in some ways kind of a self-conscious museum. People there are very clearly thinking a lot about what it means to be a museum today, how their institution interacts with other institutions, publics, and social structures like the art market. And this manifests in a number of ways. So for instance, the ICA was the first museum in the US to become wage certified, a designation given by the organization Working Artists in the Greater Economy, which advocates for increased artist pay through publishing these compensation guides, which are a sort of sliding scale based on museum size. But maybe the most significant manifestation of the ICA's kind of introspection is a project launched in 2016 called I is for Institute, which was a sort of institutional soul searching organized by my supervisor at the ICA, the curator Alex Klein. And this initiative consisted of archival work, curatorial programming, and also a series of conversations between ICA staff and people working at other contemporary art organizations and institutions around the world, focused on these questions of kind of institutional identity and the future of contemporary art spaces. And my internship coincided with the end of this initiative, which ran, I guess, eight or 9 years. And so Alex asked me to take ownership of the process of archiving it. And so that ended up being quite a unwieldy project. So first I worked on archiving these conversations that Alex and other staff had recorded and released as podcast episodes. I mentioned earlier that the ICA is affiliated with the University of Pennsylvania. And so the ICA's archive is held in the UPenn archive. And so I visited that in preparation for this work. I had a chance to review some materials from like the planning of historic ICA exhibitions, which was super fascinating to see how a big museum show was organized in the days before email or even fax machines, with lots of typewritten letters and photographs mailed back and forth. And I also got the chance to participate in the second to last Eyes for Institute conversation, where Alex and I spoke with the Istanbul-based curator Maurice Barito, who runs this very cool cross-cultural arts organization called Proto Cinema. And that was cool to see how many people were needed to make something like that a success. And it was, of course, fantastic to talk to Mari and get to know her. But Eyes for Institute also had this curatorial programming element of it, and it culminated in an exhibition held last spring in partnership with the Dakar, Senegal-based group Raw Academy, which is sort of a residential program for researching and studying how artistic and curatorial practice can evolve, rooted in the question, how do we learn from each other? And so for this exhibition, Raw actually relocated its staff and organization to Philadelphia for 4 months, and hosted a cohort of fellows from all around the world who lived residentially in Philly and did a series of classes, collaborative artistic and curatorial practices, public events, all focused on this question of how the infrastructure behind the global production of art might be imagined differently. And this was run in partnership sort of under the direction of the artist and filmmaker Linda Good Bryant. And the ephemera from this were also part of my archiving task. And so this was challenging, not just because of the volume of the material related to planning the partnership, which had been 6 years in the making, and involved visas, travel, accommodation for people from 11 countries, but also the varied and ephemeral nature of the material produced during the sessions, which included video and web-based content, analog photographs, sculptures, and records of public engagement via blackboards, postcards, Polaroids, all kinds of things like that. Complicating this further, and this is something I'll touch on briefly at the end of my presentation, was that the university archives, where the ICA actually archived the physical things, had an enormous backlog, and ICA was limited to 2 banker boxes for the entirety of this 6 or 7 year Eyes for Institute project. But with Alex's help, we eventually were able to whittle it down. And actually on the last day of my time there, we delivered our boxes to the university archives, which is very exciting. The second of these 2 major projects was early planning for an ICA exhibition, which will open in fall 2024, which is the first major survey of works by an artist named Carl Cheng. And organized by Alex, this show will start at ICA Philly, but then we'll travel to the Tingley Museum in Basel, Switzerland, and the Bonafante Museum in Maastricht in the Netherlands. A little more about Carl. Carl's work, and this is a quote from his website, takes a material and conceptual approach that pushes the boundary of traditional object making, post-minimalism, systems art, environmental art, and social practice. For nearly 7 decades, he has produced pioneering works exploring, as Mark Johnstone has written, quote, technology and nature as levers, one applied to the other. Carl's work's incredible. It's hard to capture in just a couple of slides. It grapples with the often turbulent intersections of industrial technology, nature, race, and American capitalism, often in playful and surprising ways. His works range from tiny sculptures, maybe just a few inches wide, to enormous installations, public art projects, and art tools like the one seen here, where he's built a machine that redraws this sort of pseudo-urban landscape in sand every day at the exhibition space. And so, as a relatively unknown artist nearing the end of his career, The show represents both an opportunity for more people to see Carl's amazing work, and also a chance for Carl to kind of speak to the future, to speak to art viewers and scholars through an extensive catalog that will be published alongside the show. In support of the catalog, I conducted like about a dozen hours of oral history interviews with Carl, discussing everything from his experiences with crooked city politicians administering public art programs in Arizona to his truly unique view on the relationship between technology and the environment. And it was this wonderful experience getting to know him. We spent a lot of time together. And so I organized kind of our conversational material into these themes and edited them into more narrative format, really preparing them for them to go through like a more fine-grained editorial process for the catalog itself. My time getting to know Carl also helped me contribute writing to an ICA eventually successful grant application for a Pew Center for Arts and Heritage grant, which will actually help bring the exhibition to fruition. And I just contributed a very small part, but it felt really cool to be a part of what was like this incredible, excellent outcome for them as an institution. So how to sum up my time at ICA? When I started thinking about this presentation, it struck me that much of the work I did there was concerned with how a museum focused on the future of art was engaging with the past, both their own institutional past, but also the lives and histories of the artists and collaborators who they work with. And this reminded me of something that Alex said to me early on in my time working with her, which was that for the ICA, our archive is our collection. So as a non-collecting museum, the ICA faces different challenges and opportunities than a museum like the Philadelphia Museum of Art, for instance. I think what Alex was getting at here was that for the ICA, the records, traces, memories, and legacy of past programs is what defines the institution and provides it with a reference point when moving to the future, in a similar way that maybe the Mona Lisa defines the Louvre. In many ways, this tracks with my experience at the ICA, but it also points towards some interesting tensions I observed while working there. Namely that the conceptualization of the ICA's archive differed depending on the context. And so I'll close with just some brief reflections on that. In an influential 2016 paper, the archival studies scholar and archivist Michelle Caswell voiced an irritation that I think was felt by many people in those professions, namely that the quote-unquote archival turn in the humanities was often so metaphorical that it was completely divorced from actually existing archives. Archival studies scholars and working archivists, in her view, instead had to contend with a resolutely material world, one of dusty banker boxes and processing backlogs. And I think that in a way, the ICA sort of sits in between these divergent viewpoints and has to kind of hold the tension of that position. At times, the ICA archive functioned really in a richly metaphorical way. It was this touch point for the institution, part of how the ICA positioned itself both as a museum for a broad public with free entry, and as an intellectually rigorous site at the bleeding edge of contemporary art, where scholars and thinkers came. Other times, though, the archive was resolutely non-metaphorical. I mentioned that this backlog at the archives, and when I arrived, actually, I was frustrated trying to visit some of these because much of the archival material from recent exhibitions, even back 15 or 20 years, still hasn't been processed and was unavailable for viewing. And so while some of the digitally born materials from, for example, IAS for Institute could easily be kind of unofficially archived through cloud storage at the institution, the ICA's lack of physical storage space, because they don't have a collection, meant that the physical objects and documents we wanted to preserve presented like a tangible and immediate challenge. There was this like big pile of stuff in the conference room, and people were always like, when are you going to get rid of that? What are you going to get rid of that? Like, we need this space back. Ultimately, I think my time working with Alex, Carl, and the other ICA staff gave me a window into an institution which embodied and held a lot of tensions, including this one between different views on what an archive is or what it could be. The ICA deals both in the metaphorical and in the material, perhaps in ways which are unique to a museum that is both university affiliated and non-collecting. And while some of these tensions are frustrating, I think that ultimately the institution's ability to hold them unresolved is part of its magic. It's not quite one thing or another, but it is certainly a very special place, and I enjoyed interning there immensely. I'll leave it there, but thank you so much for listening, and happy to stick around for any questions.
Thank you, Pelle. Absolutely wonderful. Well, we are at 1 o'clock or a couple minutes after, but we'll stay on for a few minutes if there are any questions that people would like to ask to Kimberly about her work in Chicago or Pelle and his internship endeavors in Philadelphia. So if you'd like to raise your hand with a question or type it into the chat, we'll stay on a little bit longer here. Yes, go ahead, please, Brad.
Thank you both for two really interesting and different presentations. I enjoyed them immensely. My question is for Pelle, and as a former grad of the School of Information myself, I'm interested in how your internship experience in Philadelphia relates to or informs the doctoral work you're doing in your program.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I think many of the artists that end up being exhibited at ICA are interested, whether directly or sort of obliquely, with the relation between technology and society. And I think I've frequently been really inspired by arts-based research. And so I saw it as an opportunity to spend time in a place where people were thinking about similar sort of broad social issues as I was learning about both in the School of Information and in museum studies, but coming at them with a completely different set of tools, those of a more arts-based research practice. So for example, like these conversations I had with Carl ended up being fascinating in that regard, because he was thinking about technology and its relation to how we organize social life in really different ways than sort of any of my academic community.
I was joining a Zoom call at the same
time. So I think that I found it, I don't know, maybe best described as like an experience of cross-pollination. And I don't yet have like a clear picture of how, how museums will figure in my career as I move forward. But I think that I was very inspired by the people that I worked with and would love to like continue being able to have those cross-pollination and working with people in other spaces like that.
Sounds it was a really wonderful experience for you.
It was fantastic. Yeah, and thank you for your question. It's a great one.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Pelle or Kimberly? Oh, Brad has another question. Brad, just before you jump in, Kimberly, is your May 7th presentation going to be available online?
I don't know. I can ask. I know that it's going to be at the Stony Island Arts Bank. So if you're there, if you're in Chicago, please come. But I will ask, and maybe, I don't know, if someone wants to like text me on the chat, your email, I can send it to you if it's publicized, if it's video.
Okay, and you can also let me know at the Museum Studies program, and people can share with us as well.
Okay, that's perfect.
Okay, Brad, please.
This question's for Kim. Hi, Kim. Good to be with you again. Thank you so much for your presentation. Given the nature of the work that you were doing during your internship, I wanted to make sure that you knew about the Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia here in Michigan.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do. So Oh, go ahead, sorry.
And if not, recommend it to you, if you
Yes.
didn't know about it.
Thank you. In fact, when I was under your tutelage in the program, I believe that's when they came to Michigan to do a presentation. It's either that or I looked it up on YouTube. It's one or the other. But the Ed Williams collection reminds me of that work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a big fan of David Pilgrim's, and he's lectured on campus a number of times. So it may well have been that you experienced him in person. I just continue doing your wonderfully interesting work.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your mentorship.
Kira, you had your hand up. Would you like to ask a question, or has it been answered?
No, I had a question for Kimberly too.
Okay, go ahead.
Have you guys ever teamed up with other arts groups in Chicago? Like, have you, sorry, I've been like half paying attention. There was some cool singing at the beginning with like the Monks of Chicago, something like that. Have you ever teamed up with like the Grant Park Music Festival or anything like that to try to like reach a wider audience or anything?
So I know the Black Monks of Mississippi is a collective of artists that includes theater. And I know that they have traveled around the world doing installation performances, like the one that was on the presentation. However, I do know that Rebuild and the artists that are involved with Rebuild have a very broad, have local and very broad reach. I don't know of any specific programs that they have been involved with outside of the Rebuild organization, but I'm 1,000% sure that's because of limitations of my knowledge and not because they haven't. And just one other point, they have different houses around the south side of Chicago that have also been changed to performance and kind of museum-esque spaces. So for example, there's one called the Black Cinema House that is about a mile from the Stony Island Arts Bank, and they hold old African-American films and do community programs where they feature those films. So it's really an astonishing and amazing program, and really a wonderful place to play for artists, curators, researchers, community. Yeah. And I'll put a link to their website because it does have events, and maybe you can find some of those things on there. So thank you for your question.
Kirstine, did you have a question?
Well, I have just it's more of a comment. But first of all, I wanted to thank both of you, Pelle and Kimberly. Hi Pelle, and hi Kim, for your fabulous talks. And you know, I was so struck by the way you both talked about the archive within an art institute, and from very different angles. And Kimberly, it was just mind-blowing what the Arts Bank is doing and how it is really there to at the service. You know, it's really like a service archive for artists, and in that sense, I think very, very unique. You know, we here on our campus, I'm part of Reconnect Recollect, which focuses on the collections we hold here on our campus from the Philippines. And that's how we're trying to enliven this archive and also investigate it critically by inviting artists in. In fact, we have like another artist coming back next week. So I think that many museums, and especially and also archives, yes, especially also archives, can learn a great deal from you. So, you know, maybe that could be something where you could actually sort of create a program for other archives and museums to learn from you. So, and Pelle, maybe you have already done that. So that could be a question for you, Kim. And then for Pelle, I didn't quite understand. I think, yes, the archive is the collection. I totally got that point. And really, it was really good to think through that, what that means for that particular Museum of Contemporary Art. But is there actually also an archive space at the Museum of Contemporary Art? Or is that then only the limited space that the university archive is granting you? And is then the only archival space within the Museum of Contemporary Art a virtual space?
Yeah, it's the latter. So, and I don't know the history of how these institutional decisions were made, but the physical space is at the broader University of Pennsylvania archives, which I think actually is not limited in terms of space. Like I think they have cavernous warehouses, but it's limited like many archives are in terms of labor power. And I went in at least the public facing part you can visit is beautiful and well staffed, and the materials were, very clearly looked after. But the backlog was, close to 20 years long. They wouldn't tell us exactly how long, but I kept requesting like, okay, I'll request one 5 years earlier. I'll request one 5 years earlier. And so in practice, the accessible recent archive is just this more informal digital born materials. But I would agree really strongly with the point you made to Kimberly. I think that the opportunities are so rich for archives to invite artists in. And I think much of the artistic engagement with archives has been the artists taking the initiative. And I think it would be fruitful to try and work it more the other way, whether it's through artist in residence programs or fellowships or so I'm inspired by the work that you're doing, Kim. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you. And I thank you for the question, Kirsten. And thank you for your response, because that has really got me thinking. And then also too, I am seeding this work in my Alabama project. So we've established the formal schoolhouse. We have all these oral histories and materials. And now the first phase one was to establish the website. And now we're in the process of looking for funding to establish an online archive. And we want it to be interactive, where we are depositing information, but also that the space allows community to deposit information. And then the next step will be, how do we activate particularly young people in the area to begin to create from the archive? Because similar to what Ed Walker was saying, like many of the young people and even people who attended the Rosenwald schools did not know that story, including my mom, right? And I'm sure that was because of, this was the Jim Crow times. If kids were running around bragging about their school, it could be set on fire or something, there could be retaliation potentially. And we know for sure, it's been documented that there was retaliation against teachers and what have you. So yes, this archival work and this intersection with artists and community is really inspiring to me and something that I want to continue. And I love, love, love the idea of an educational piece to help other communities and larger institutions engage in this work. So thank you.
I think that may be a perfect note to end on, however, regrettably, since this is such a rich conversation. But I want to thank again Pelle, Tracey, and Kimberly Ransom for sharing their work and their internship experiences with all of us. And thank you for joining us for this Museums at Noon presentation. I wish you all the good day and a good weekend.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.